Yay! Okay. So, as I said, what I want to try and do in the second half here, we've only really talked about the one kind of way to get assertions wrong. The next section I'd like to do is to think about two other ways. And for lack of better terminology, we'll talk about error and lying. So let's start with error. Okay? Errors are utterances where a speaker asserts something that they believe to be true, but which in fact turns out to be false. And note we could distinguish two types of errors if you want to. There's strict errors, or what we might call primary errors, where the semantic content itself is false. Right? So I say, right, Amanda's in the office right now, believing that she is, but in fact, that's just wrong. She's cycling in at the moment, right? She isn't here yet. So then I'm mistaken, so my utterance is false, right? The sentence I've uttered is strictly false. We could also kind of extend this concept to, for lack of terminology, let's call this secondary error. Secondary error is when the pragmatic content, or some aspects of the pragmatic content, is false. So we were talking about this joking thing, right? There's the Grice's example. He's writing a cover letter for someone who's applying for a job. And Grice says he has excellent handwriting, trying to implicate that this person's an idiot and is not a good person for the job. Right? That's not said, but that is conveyed. And of course, that could be false, right? It could be that this person is actually really good for the job, and the implied content is just false. Again, we can call this an error. Strictly speaking, the only ones are going to be these ones, but we can extend the concept further along, right? So note what's interesting is you could have something that's correct at the semantic level, but implicates something false. So maybe he really does have excellent handwriting, but in fact, he's also a really good candidate. Yes?
But in the second case, like implicating content, is it always like the fault of the speaker that the content is implied to be false, or could it also be that it's taken the wrong way in the content?
So importantly, right, the implicated content is what's trying to be conveyed. It might not be uptake, right? Or the uptake might not happen. So the implicature is part of the content, but maybe the other party in this just didn't clock it or wasn't thinking about things in the right kind of way, so didn't grasp the content that was still part of the utterance.
Okay.
Again, this is why it's still going to be in there, even if the other party in the discussion doesn't get it. That happens. Okay. So again, what we can kind of think here is that in these errors, right, some, we'll call them proposition, just here kind of looking for something, some proposition either in the direct semantic content or that's part of the implicature is false. Note though, to go back before we get to lies, when we think about errors, importantly, the thing that turns out false is believed to be true. So it's taken to be true when either conveyed or when implied, implicated. Contrast that with lies. Lies are like errors, but subtly different. Lies are utterances where a speaker asserts something they believe to be false, with the intent that the audience believes it. Not that they believe it's false, but they believe it's true. And here we can draw the same kind of distinction we did a second ago. We can talk about just a flat, direct lie, where the semantic content is believed to be false, and that's what the lied to is meant to believe. Right? If I say Amanda is in the office right now, but I believe that in fact she's cycling in, right? And I tell that to you, I'm trying to get you to believe something I think is false. We can also kind of extend this to think about the implicated content. So you can lie via the implication. So Schauer and Zeckhauser call it palters, which I have never heard of before in my life. But Adler talks about false implicatures, which is much clearer. So for example, right, take the he has excellent handwriting case again. I'm writing a cover letter for someone, a recommendation letter, and I say this: I believe that this person is a good candidate. I also believe that he, in fact, has good handwriting. But I'm saying this because I want you to believe the implicature that he is not a good candidate. Note, what's important is that the semantic content I take to be true. He really does, in my opinion, have excellent handwriting. I also believe that he is, in fact, a good candidate. You should hire him, but I don't want you to, for whatever reason. So I'm trying to implicate that he's not a good candidate, get you to believe that. So it's, again, it could either be done at the direct level, the semantic content level, or at the pragmatic content level. So we can kind of use the picture, the chart that we've been playing with, to elucidate the difference here. But note, in both cases, the aim is to assert something meaningful, something that has some semantic and pragmatic content. Right? So not nonsense, but something that is believed to be false, either literally or in the pragmatics, either in the semantics or the pragmatics. Right? The difference between these two concerns the location, if you like, of the falsehood. Is it just something that I thought was true and it turns out it's not? Or is it something that I thought was false and I want you to believe it's true? There's an interesting complication here before we get to the kind of picture, and it's this, right? Can we have cases of error which are nonsense? So here's what I have in mind, right? We agreed, or at least implicitly I took it, that you guys agreed sometimes the nonsense can convey pragmatic elements. So I could use nonsense to tell a lie in this sense of lie. Similarly, I could use nonsense to make an error in that secondary sense of making an error. So that's something really weird, and I'm not sure what to say about that. That feels wrong to me, intuitively. It feels to me like in order to make an error or to tell a lie, right, you can't be doing it in this sort of weird backdoor nonsense way. But if we think that nonsense can be used to express pragmatic content, and that there's this sort of extended notion of error and extended notion of lying, then you can lie with nonsense. Then you can make mistakes. You can commit errors with nonsense. Yes?
So would that be, if, hypothetically speaking, I would try to lie. Like, I would say something that I mean that is believed to be false, but it actually is true. Like, oh yeah, he lost his game. Like, I don't know, I'm lying. And then he did lose. Would that be an error then?
Good. So we're going to come to that, right?
Okay.
Keep the thought. Right. So, again, the key difference here between these two is this location of falsehood and the associated intent. Errors are false but believed true, and I want you to buy the truth. I'm just making a mistake. lies are believed false, and I want you to get it wrong. But importantly, get it wrong relative to what I believe is the case. I might be wrong in the first place. So let's look at a couple examples, right? So take Amanda's in the office, but it's the error case, right? In fact, she's cycling on the way here, right? So it's got semantic content, it's got pragmatic content. I'm uttering it with the right kind of intentions. And I believe it to be true, but I'm just wrong, right? The truth conditions are not met. So in that sense, the failure is the truth conditions are not met. I was mistaken thinking that they were. Everything else is running exactly as it should, just that bit has gone wrong. Contrast that with the same sentence told as a lie. In the case where Amanda's in the office told as a lie, I believe it to be false. Now, it might turn out that it is in fact false. But what's important is that I believe it's false, and I want you to believe something false. So I'm going to get you in this case to believe something that Amanda's in the office that I take to in fact not be the case. I think she's on her bike on the way here now, or she's at home. And so I want you, for whatever reason, to buy the thing that I think is false. Note that the failure here isn't that the truth conditions aren't met, it's that I believe the truth conditions aren't met. This is really important because it leaves open cases where you can lie by telling the truth. This is the kind of case you were interested in, right? But note again, right? We can place this, it can either be at the level of semantic or pragmatic. We're thinking here just at the semantic because the pragmatic example, right? So you have some French partisans, and one of them is trying to protect his friend, and he thinks that his friend is like somewhere else entirely. So he lies and he says, "Oh, Bruce is hiding in the cemetery," when in fact that is where he is. Right? The partisan is mistaken. He thinks that Bruce is somewhere else entirely. So he's trying to misdirect, but in fact, in misdirecting, he's saying something that turns out to be true. It's still a lie, not because this is false, but because it was believed to be false. The utterer thought it was false. The other really interesting thing is you can say truthful claims with the intent that the audience believes something false. So you can just be totally above board, effectively, and yet still somehow lie. So this was apparently Freud's favorite joke. You have two Russians on a train, right? And B asks A where he's going, and A says, "I'm going to Pinsk." And B says, "Liar! You say you're going to Pinsk to make me believe that you're going to Minsk, but I know you're going to Pinsk." So B is either an idiot or, right, A is basically playing a double bluff. And, right, either one might be the case. But of course, if we take this as a double bluff, there is a sense in which by telling the truth, A lied. But A didn't lie at the level of semantic content. A lied at the level of pragmatic content. The implicature was the lie, which B saw through. It's a really interesting example, but it drives home this idea that lying can happen either at the level of the semantic stuff or at the level of the pragmatics. This only works if you understand it at the level of the pragmatics. And these things happen, right? Double bluffs work. They occur. The last one that's interesting is what's sometimes called polite untruths. So these are false statements. So the semantic content is false, but it's used to convey true pragmatic content. So an example of this, right? You come to the door of a very fancy house, you knock on the door and you ask to see, in this case, say the lady of the house, and the butler tells you, Madame is not at home. Now he could say this very much with the knowledge that you know that she is. What is he trying to convey? He's not trying to convey that she's not home. Not really. He's trying to convey that she is uninterested in talking to you, whether they are home or not. Is this a lie? Well, not really. There's a sense in which you could read it as one, but there's very clearly a sense in which this is, if you like, just a implicature. It's a false assertion with true implicatures. Do we want to call that a lie? Do we want to call that an error? Well, there are reasons for starting to pull it apart.
Then a sentence is fully true in both domains. Doesn't like the pragmatic domain and the semantic domain coincide? Are they like unify into one? Or
well, not necessarily, right? So the semantic content is going to be what the sentence effectively literally says, setting aside weird cases. The pragmatic content is going to be what else is conveyed.
oh yeah, aside from that, yeah.
Right? So again, take the I'm living, right? Semantic, check. Pragmatic content, I could be a lot better, right? That kind of stuff. Now there will be cases where it is literally the same, right? But then in those cases, there's not really much in the way of pragmatic content.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay. Again, what's interesting here is trying to pull apart these concepts. It's pretty intuitive, to my mind at least, that there's a difference between error and lying. How do we do certain cases here? Hard. All of this, though, builds us up to, finally, we can talk about Harry Frankfurt. Frankfurt introduces this concept of bullshit. Actually, that's doing him far too much service. Frankfurt articulates this concept of bullshit, right, in the paper that we read for today. And what's important is Frankfurt thinks bullshit is different from those three. It's not nonsense, it's not lying, and it's not error. It's something different. So let's talk about it. Frankfurt contends bullshit is a distinctive trait of modern society. That's probably wrong. Bullshit has been around since we started talking. But what's important is, again, he thinks it's something distinct from these other kinds of mistakes, ways of doing it wrong. He gives us an example, right? So there's an orator on the 4th of July. Is also very US-centric, so apologies. So there's this orator on the 4th of July who's giving up and giving a speech. And in the speech, the orator says, our great and blessed country, whose founding fathers, under divine guidance, created a new beginning for mankind. This is paradigmatic bullshit. Because it's just pompous nothing. So we can use this as a paradigmatic example. Frankfurt thinks that this is a distinct kind of utterance. Or at least in the same sense that what we've been doing. So what's characteristic of bullshit? First, according to Frankfurt, A bullshitter is indifferent to the truth or falsity of what they say. They do not care whether the semantic content of their utterance is true or false. Note, it's not that their utterance is neither true or false. It's that they don't care. The truth value of their utterance is irrelevant to the bullshitter. Similarly, according to Frankfurt, the bullshitter is indifferent to the audience's beliefs with regards to the utterance, the content of the utterance. They don't care, according to Frankfurt, the bullshitter doesn't care whether the audience in fact believes that the founding fathers under divine guidance created a new beginning for mankind. It's not really part of the activity here. It's not trying to get you to believe this. It's not trying to get you to believe the opposite. Because in some sense, the bullshitter doesn't give a shit about what you believe, one way or the other, with regards to this. Similarly, the bullshitter does intend to deceive, but they don't intend to deceive about the content. They intend to deceive about their utterance. They intend to deceive you, the audience, from the fact that they are bullshitting. They want you to think that they are doing something else. Probably making assertions. So the deception isn't at the level of content. It's at the level, if you like, of speech type, of utterance type. And finally, the big one. Bullshitting and lying, according to Frankfurt, are incompatible. You can't bullshit and lie at the same time. Now we're going to come to this one because this is going to be the biggest contested one. But interestingly, we can contest all four of these. So let's go through them one by one. Let's start with the idea that the bullshitter is indifferent to the truth or falsity of what is said. Sorry. I forgot first to articulate the kind of what's going on here, right? If we put this in our picture, right, we're taking the kind of paradigmatic, our great, beautiful founding father, divine providence, whatever, right? It's got some semantic content, probably. But the utterer does not care whether it's true or false. They might believe that it's true. They might believe that it's false. Doesn't matter. That's not part of the reason why they're uttering it. Similarly, this reflexive intention is not met because they don't care about what's going on with the beliefs of the audience. At least not with regards to this content. They care about what the audience takes about the act itself. So there's a failure at the concern for truth and a failure at the level of communicative intent. That is, communicative intent in that I want you to think I'm not bullshitting, I want you to think I'm asserting, telling you the truth, something like this.
Is it then, I lost the word, is it then illocutionary or?
It could be, right? So we could see this as tied in with illocutionary, like it's a speech act of a certain type, where in effect what I'm trying to do with my speech act is to disguise that I'm bullshitting.
I wonder, what is then if this is not if you don't have these intentions with bullshitting, then what is your intention with bullshitting?
Good. So remember, there is an intent. The intent is to deceive you with regards to my activity. So I don't want you to believe founding father stuff. I want you to believe that I'm asserting these kinds of things, that I care. I want you to believe that I believe this and that I'm trying to get you to believe it too. But that's not what I'm doing. That's not what I actually am like. If you like, there's a kind of meta speech act going on. The deception is about what kind of activity I'm doing right now. That's the thought.
Yeah.
Okay. So again, let's go through the four, right? Frankfurt says the bullshitter is indifferent to the truth or falsity for what is said. So here's what he says. The statement is grounded neither in a belief that it's true, nor, as a lie must be, in a belief that it is not true. It is just this lack of connection to a concern with truth, this indifference to how things really are, that I regard as of the essence of bullshit. So this is really the key thing, right? Bullshit is utterances that are made without a concern for the truth or falsity of the sentences involved in the utterance. Okay. Some really strange things can happen here. Arguably, cases where the bullshitter needs to care about the truth or falsity. Here's an example from Cohen. So there's a fishing trip that's going to happen. The fishing trip's in the future, and people are kind of on the group chat talking about the fishing trip. And one of the members of the trip has never been to this place, doesn't know what it's going to be like. And in some sense, doesn't really care whether the fishing is good or bad. But they do care in a way because they want all of their friends to be excited about the trip. So they say, the fishing there is outstanding, even though they don't know anything about the actual fishing in the place they're going to go to. They care about the truth or falsity of this statement. They want it to be true. They want it to be true because they want everyone involved to be excited about the trip. But they're still bullshitting. They're still bullshitting because they have no grip on whether the fishing at this place they're going to is in fact good or bad. Says Cohen. Another example of this kind of thing where someone could actually care about the truth or falsity of what is said. Carson's example. You have a student writing an answer on an exam. The student knows that the teacher, who's a grader, is very eccentric. That is, the teacher will give the student a 0 if the essay isn't true and accurate. But they'll give them a 6 even if what's said is true and accurate but irrelevant. So the student proceeds to bullshit. Gives something that has nothing to do with the question asked. But everything the student says is true. Bullshit, but very careful about the truth value of what is bullshit. Right? Again, it's a weird kind of case, but you can start to see how these work. Effectively, there might be pragmatic reasons, not pragmatic in the sense we've been, but reasons to want things to just be true or just be false. But what you're doing still should count as bullshit. And this is bad. If these are true, if these kinds of cases go through, then what Frankfurt says is the very essence of his concept fails. So these are interesting kind of cases to think about. Let's talk about the other propositions, right? The other properties. So the second thing Frankfurt says is that the bullshitter is indifferent to audience's beliefs. So again, he's talking about our orator at the beginning. The orator doesn't really care what his audience thinks about the founding fathers or about the role of the deity in our country's history or the like. At least it's not an interest in what anyone thinks about these matters that motivates his speech. The oration is not driven by trying to share beliefs or get the audience to believe. It's just not in the cards. But there, of course, are going to be cases where something like bullshit, or something like a bullshitter is going to care about what the audience believes. Propaganda, arguably, is going to be a version of bullshit. And of course, propagandists do care about what the audience buys into. That's kind of the point. So a propagandist might be indifferent to what is being propagandized. Probably not likely, but they could. But that's still bullshittery. So again, the second point. The third point. Right? Bullshitting involves an intention to deceive the audience about the aims, about the activity. So Frankfurt says, right, the bullshitter may not deceive us or even intend to do so, either about the facts or about what he takes the facts to be. What he does necessarily attempt to deceive us about is his enterprise. His only indispensable distinctive characteristic is that in a certain way he misrepresents what he is up to. But again, we can come up with cases where that's not true. Here's another jokey example. We've got a student writing another essay. This is another one from Carson. The students will get a 6 if they submit something, even if it's deeply off topic. And the students might submit something deeply off topic explicitly with the aim of either annoying or amusing the teacher.
Give an example of a risk.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Big risk. So again, it's a contrived case, but you can hopefully start to see what this case is trying to do. Right? It's a case where there's no deception, but it still is obviously bullshit. Because I want you to see that I'm bullshitting here. Either because I think it's going to be funny, or I'm out to annoy you, or whatever. Or I'm trying to give you an example of bullshit. There's another case. The big one, well, the other big one, to go back, right? This one is really important. If this turns out to fail, then what he takes to be the essence of bullshit is not the essence of bullshit after all. But the last one is this distinction between bullshitting and lying. He says there is no intersection. You can't do both at the same time. So telling a lie is an act with a sharp focus. It's designed to insert a particular falsehood at a specific point in a set or system of beliefs in order to avoid the consequences of having that point occupied by a truth. Fancy way to say, I want you to believe something that's false, or I take to be false. Problem, we can do both at the same time. So Carson talks about a case where we could tell a lie as part of, or even the whole of, a bullshit evasive answer to a question. So A asks B, is your colleague an atheist? B says, well, as a boy he always went to church and loved singing Christmas carols. B knows this claim to be false. He knows this is a lie. And this answer is evasive bullshit. It's not answering the question. It's not relevant. And B cares about the truth or falsity in some sense. But what they really care about is just getting away from the question. That looks like a case where it's both a lie and bullshit. Bad, because Frankfurt said they're different. Interestingly, later, Frankfurt acknowledged the possible intersection, right? He talks about advertisers. So I'll read this one. My presumption is that advertisers generally decide what they're going to say in their advertisements without caring what the truth is. Therefore, what they say in their advertisements is bullshit. Of course, they may also happen to know, or they may happen to subsequently discover, disadvantageous truths about their product. In that case, what they choose to convey is something that they know to be false, and so they end up not merely bullshitting, but telling lies as well. In this case, though, they are liars only, as it were, incidentally or by accident. So the thought is, initially they were bullshitting, subsequently they discover the truth value of whatever they were saying before, and then that kind of moves it into bullshit and lying. But it's only lying inadvertently. But we can call bullshit on that. Right? Here's a fun challenge. This is an example from, I think it's Cohen. Right? We've got Parker. Parker's a kid. He's a high schooler. He wants to convince his parents that he studied for a chemistry exam, even though he is not. Right? So when asked by his parents whether he's ready for the exam, he says, I've studied really hard and I'm ready for the exam. Right? According to Frankfurt, Parker's lying, but not bullshitting. But there's a sense in which we could read him just like the advertiser. Okay? Because what is he really trying to do? He's trying to just get through the question. I just want to eat breakfast. Mom, Dad, please leave me alone. I don't want to get in trouble. So, kind of extending this thought, right? Most liars assert P because they want to assert P, disregarding the fact that they don't believe P. And it's natural to say that the truth value of P is, in some sense, unimportant to a liar. But if that's true, isn't the ordinary liar a bullshitter? Isn't Parker doing both? Because he doesn't care that he hasn't studied. Right? The truth or falsity of his having studied is irrelevant to him lying to his parents. He just wants to not get in trouble.
Doesn't, like, if you're a liar, you need to know, like, you need to have some basis of a belief that is false or true, right?
Good.
Assert a lie.
So note again, right? This claim here, right? He's going to say that he studied, even though he doesn't believe that he studied, because he knows he didn't.
Mm-hmm.
So there is a sense in which the truth value of I studied the exam is irrelevant to him saying that he has.
The pragmatics. Yeah, okay, yeah.
Well, yeah.
If he
So
did study hard, then there is no reason to.
nice. So this is the next move, right? Frankfurt can dig his heels in, and he can say there is a sense in which, even in this case, it kind of is a reason. Right? So here's what we might do. Right? We can say something like, for most people, the fact that a statement is false constitute in itself a reason, however we can easily overridden, not to make a statement. For the bullshitter, it is in itself neither a reason in favor nor a reason against. So, putting this in terms of Parker's case, right? Parker's not studying is a reason for not saying that he has. Tracking the truth is at least some kind of reason, minimal however it is. This reason then gets overridden by his need to assuage his parents. If Parker was bullshitting, there would be no overriding. Right? Because there would be no reasons to override. The truth or falsity of his not studying wouldn't be a reason at all, even in this kind of minimal case. Here's the problem. Wouldn't that same thing apply back to our opening example too? Our orator talking about the founding fathers and the divine guidance creating a new model for mankind. Why could we not say the same thing here? Our orator, right, doesn't believe what he's saying, but he has an overriding need to, I don't know, get the votes of the people that are listening. Much like Parker's overriding need to assuage his parents' concerns. So, Frankfurt's opening example of bullshit isn't bullshit. It's a lie. Shit. Why aren't we going to be able to do this exact same thing with every would-be example? So it's a kind of problem, right? So go back. We want to try and show why the ordinary liar isn't a bullshitter. There is a way to do it, and it has to do with this kind of thing, right? Oh, truthfulness is going to be a reason that might be overridden. But if truthfulness is a reason that's overridden, why is it not one here? Frankfurt needs to give us a reason, ironically, for why the orator here is not overriding this sort of, you should generally tell the truth, but is instead completely disregarding. And if you can't give a motivation for that, there's no reason to think that this is bullshit rather than a lie. Okay. So all of this, again, is to try and draw out these distinctions. We talked about nonsense. We talked about errors and lying. And we talked about bullshit, which is, at least according to Frankfurt, entirely distinct. Maybe the way he's drawn this demarcation doesn't quite make it entirely distinct, but hopefully we at least intuitively see the differences between the four. I want to wrap up by talking to you about the last type. And the last type here is fiction. There's a sense in which, if we're taking assertions as our base case, fiction is going to be yet another way that we can do something wrong. We get assertions wrong. Fiction's a thorny topic. We're going to talk about this in a couple weeks' time anyway. But let's take the assertions that constitute a fiction. Many of the assertions that constitute a fiction aren't going to be true. Holmes is not a detective. Harry is not a wizard. Problematic example. But these claims, without the negations, are false. Right? Holmes isn't a detective. If you round up all the detectives that have ever been, he ain't gonna be in them. But it's not intuitive to think of fiction as a kind of lying or as a kind of error. And it'd be very weird to think that fiction makers are bullshitters. So we need to kind of find a way to fit fiction in here that doesn't collapse it into one of the ones we've talked about. And here's the idea. Fiction isn't aimed at belief. Fiction is aimed at make-belief. That is, fictional assertions aren't assertions in the sense of trying to get audiences to believe some proposition. They're instead trying to get you to imagine, to make believe a relevant proposition. I don't want you to take it to be true that Holmes is a detective. I want you to imagine that it's true Holmes is a detective. So we have something like this. Holmes is a detective will have semantic content. Strictly speaking, it's false because he is not. He isn't, right? He doesn't even exist. It might be believed to be true, inadvertently, if we think that fictions can include actual truths. If in the Holmes stories it says Glasgow's north of London, cool, I believe that to be true. There might be pragmatic content also conveyed. But what's important is that we do not have the reflexive intention regarding belief. We have a reflexive intention regarding make-believe. I don't believe that Holmes is a detective, and I don't want you to believe it either. Then I would be lying to you. But what I do want you to do is to imagine it, to make believe it, to play along in my game.
does constitute to some degree a truth value, right? Because
So, right, the sentence is false, but importantly, I don't really care, in a sense, about whether it's true or false, because I don't want to play the belief game right now. I want to play the imagination game. And imagination, make-believe, is a different kind of thing than belief.
Can't you make this even stronger by saying that it's not about our real world, it's about a different world, and then the sentence is simply true.
Could be. But note that the sentence by itself, at least as it's written, doesn't say anything about some other world. So if we want to read it that way, we're going to have to take it that there's an implicit kind of modifier in there. This is not the whole sentence.
Yeah, but that's also true for a sentence which is about our world, right? It has the same modifier, it's also implicit.
Possibly, right? It'll depend on how we read this. So one of the things we'll talk about in a few weeks is this idea of a truth in fiction operator. So when I say Holmes is a detective, what I'm really saying is, in the Holmes fiction, Holmes is a detective.
Indeed, yeah.
So there's an implicit kind of restriction there. Yeah. And then the assertion's true. But note, what is it I'm trying to get you to believe? I'm trying to get you to believe
about that world. Because if you later state that he's a plumber, the example we mentioned before, then you can truly say that that's false, right? Even false.
It's false in the story.
Yeah.
Right? But again, what we have to be careful then is mapping, if you like, this talk of in the other world back to what am I actually saying? This is another way to count out the same idea, right? Instead of believing what's true, we can instead think about what's going on in some other situation. And if there's a failure here, it's the failure of this concern about actual truth or falsity. Because we don't need to care about actual truth or falsity, we're interested in make-believe.
So there are, in the realm of when we say something is logically possible or metaphysically possible, there is like some degree to that you can say it's true or false, right?
Nice. But the thing to remember when we talk about possible or necessary or anything like that, it isn't the claim inside the possibility operator that we're saying is true or false. We're making the possibility assertion is true or false.
Yeah.
My shirt is black. That's true.
Yeah.
My shirt is blue is false.
Mm.
Possibly my shirt is blue. That claim is true.
Mm.
But that's because the whole claim is possibly this. So not the thing inside the possibility operator, but with the possibility operator.
Yeah.
It's a different claim. And it'll be the same kind of thing here. In the Holmes fiction, Holmes is a detective. True. Holmes is a detective. False.
Yeah.
Different claim. One of them has the in the story operator. One of them doesn't. Different claim. But note, again, if we buy this, this is again something we pull apart from the other ways of getting it wrong. It's not nonsense. It's not an error. It's not a lie. And it's not bullshit. It's doing something different. It's fictionalizing. Yeah.
So what if you assert the claim within your world of fiction and then afterwards you make another claim that contradicts that assertion that you made? Is that not bullshit or a lie? Or?
Nice. So there's a couple ways to kind of read this, right? One of them is, suppose we have in the fiction P and in the fiction not P. What do we say then? Tough claim. And we'll talk about it when we get to truth in fiction. One thing is, fictions don't have to be consistent. Fictions are fictions. They're not the real world. The real world might have to be consistent, but the stories we're telling don't have to be. So it wouldn't make it bullshit. It would just make it a very strange fiction, which is okay, right? Now there's a different thing of so take this case, right? I say in the Holmes stories, Holmes is a detective. That's true with the in the story operator. Take that off. Holmes is a detective. False. If I then turn out to walk around in the world and find, oh shit, here is Sherlock, and he is a detective, I was wrong. I made an error. So again, it would be a version of one of the things we talked about before. Importantly, it's only going to be bullshit if I don't care whether it's genuinely true or false, if I don't make it a statement about its truth or falsity. So it's a different kind of thing here. And importantly, when we're fictionalizing, at least in principle, we'll talk about this in a couple weeks again, but at least in principle, the stuff we put into a fiction might be true or it might be false. Holmes as a detective is false. He is not a detective, but it can be true in the fiction. Glasgow's north of London is true. It can also be true in the fiction.
I still have trouble. If you go back to the very first course, we talked about the pronouns or the
Names.
names. Then there isn't a Holmes, right?
This is one of the fun issues, right?
It's not even false.
It's not even, because this will turn out to be nonsense. That's hard. Because
Like that King of France story, right?
well, this is a paradigmatic example of an empty name, and we're right back at one of the problems we started with, right? How do we make sense of claims about objects when they're the empty name, right? Holmes is the detective. What are we even trying to say here? Because Holmes picks out nothing. That's going to be a problem whether you think that it goes with make-believe or the in the fiction operator or anything. What proposition is true in the fiction? I have no idea. Because Holmes as a detective isn't even a proposition. It's at best half of one. Is a detective. That's hard. Yeah.
It seems to me that regarding to bullshit, the precursor to bullshit in comparison to the other types is fully dependent on the speaker's intention, separated from the truthfulness and falsehood of the proposition.
Again, you can kind of see these as building in different ways. Errors, right? You're just mistaken. Lying, you could be mistaken, but what's important is you think it's one way and you want them to believe the other. Bullshit, you do not care if it's one way or the other. You just want them to do something else.
I have the intuition that it's a bit hard to determine what's bullshit if you can't see the user's intention of that message. So how do you then determine solely on sentences that it's bullshit?
Nice. So nothing we've said here is going to do that.
Okay.
We are just trying to pull them apart at this kind of conceptual level.
Okay. Yeah.
Nothing about an epistemology of figuring that out.
Okay.
That's a different matter.
Yeah.
Okay. So finally, to finish off, right? We talked about 5 ways to think about how assertions go wrong: nonsense, error, lying, bullshit, fiction. Here I've spelled bullshit with 2 T's somehow. Right? What's interesting is, again, how these come apart, how they differentiate. Now, these are fun and they're interesting. I've tried to characterize them. I do not think entirely successfully. That was really what I hoped the take-home message is. There's intuitive differences here. It's very hard to draw clear lines. Whoa, oh no, this is the wrong thing. So, for next time.
See you next week. Is okay.
Yeah, we're going to just do this again. For next time, what we're going to talk about is rule following. So, the final thing that I want to do here, and importantly, it's not even next time, it's not next week, it's in 2 weeks. There is no class next week. In 2 weeks, we're going to talk about this idea that maybe, there is no meaning at all. And in fact, this whole project of trying to understand what people are communicating was a fundamental mistake. No one is saying anything ever. And to get to that idea, we're going to think about what is it you're doing when you do addition. We're going to look at Kripke's Kripke's paper on this, well, it's called Kripkenstein. But the broad idea is looking at Wittgenstein's argument against the possibility of private languages. So have a read of that. It is a very, very, very fascinating paper. Hopefully got the PDF linked. I'll double check it and get home. And as I said, I'll put up some of the questions for our exam and fix this so that it's proper. But I won't see you next week, so have a lovely, lovely couple weeks, and we'll see you again in a while. Thanks for coming, guys.
Thank you.